My wife found something strange while we were camping, and she refuses to put it down. Apologies in advance for any typos or grammatical errors. I'm typing this on my phone with my non-dominant hand. Everything happened recently, so it's still so vivid in my mind. My wife, Fallon, had never been camping before, and we decided to go together for our 5-year wedding anniversary. It probably doesn't sound like the most glorious vacation for an anniversary, but we love the outdoors and we figured it'd be a great break from our indoor desk jobs. The first couple of days we hiked, watched the stars, and relaxed together. We live in the middle of the city, so we enjoyed seeing the tall blue spruces, the mountains, and smelling the fresh air. It was the perfect trip. Things started to go downhill today, the day before we planned on leaving. We decided to start our hike on a trail we had walked before and immensely enjoyed, planning to take a different fork this time. We were taking in the sights. We had started discussing moving out of the city so we could do things like this more often. We both worked from home, so it was a very real possibility, and we were engrossed in our conversation on the logistics of such a move that it took us about 20 minutes to realize we hadn't hit the fork in the trail yet. That didn't seem right. So I pulled up the picture of the trail map I had taken on my phone. According to the map, we should have reached it already. The trail we were supposed to be on split into a Y shape, so it would have been hard to miss. Instead, this trail continued straight on. It had been a couple of days since our first track on that trail, so we figured we just got disoriented and ended up on a different trail. It was a pleasant walk and seemed straightforward enough, so we figured we'd keep going and could easily find our way back. We kept going, taking in the sights, enjoying the soft breeze, and the smell of the pines it brought with it. We walked on in silence, listening to the rustling of the wind in the trees, and occasional sound of small animals stepping through fallen pine needles. We eventually heard rushing water and came to a small stream. It wasn't very wide, less than 4 feet. But the way the water moved, I guessed it was likely deeper than it looked. I dropped a small rock in out of curiosity. It was whisked straight down and away much faster than one would have guessed based on its appearance. Fallon nudged me. She pulled out the paper map from the park and pointed out that the stream didn't show up on the map at all. We wondered if we had accidentally left the boundaries of the park. The trail looked well-worn and safe. It wasn't as if we were wandering off into uncharted wilderness, so we decided to continue on and hoped we weren't trespassing. Due to the width of the stream, I just stepped over and put my hand out to help Fallon. But by the time I turned to where she had been standing, she had already cleared the distance in a graceful jump. Show off, I teased. She stuck her tongue out at me. We were fascinated by the sudden change in our surroundings on that side of the stream. The forest had taken on a new look. The trees were taller, closer together. They were older looking. As the density and height of the trees increased, the amount of light seeping in through the canopy decreased immensely. Still, the trail continued on. I don't remember when the silence began. Was it after the stream or before? I only noticed it when a light mist set in and Fallon disappeared. I jumped. She had snuck behind me and whispered in my ear, this would be the perfect setting for something to pop out of the woods and drag us away screaming. I laughed. Yeah, that'd make for one hell of an anniversary. It was only after we stopped talking and the silence stood in stark contrast that I realized that we hadn't heard a single sound, other than our own steps and breathing, in a while. We eventually came to a clearing where there were no trees, no grass, just a small lake surrounded by dark soil. The difference in light between the dark, shadowed forest and the bright clearing had us blinking at the sudden return of the sun. The lake looked more like a crater in the black soil than water, until a gentle breeze created waves. The water was so dark, but even more oddly, there was no reflection. Fallon, who is terrified of deep water, inhaled sharply, stepped backwards instinctively. I hadn't seen anything like it before, and wanted to take a picture. I wanted to look online when we got home to see where we had ended up. It was fascinating. There weren't any footprints, human or otherwise, in the soil besides ours. I pulled out my phone and immediately dropped it on the ground. In the brief amount of time it took for me to bend down to retrieve it, wipe the black soil off the screen and lens, and stand back up, something in the atmosphere had shifted. The air was colder, and it was darker in the clearing. The sky had become cloudier. It had almost a greenish hue to it. The water was moving. Ripples emanated from the middle, as something disrupted the otherwise calm water. Whatever it was coming up from under the surface. Something in me knew whatever was coming out of there was not something we should stick around and see. I backed away, my mouth set in a grim line as I turned around to see if Fallon was seeing the same thing, and I wasn't imagining it. She was staring at the lake as well, but with an expression I couldn't quite place at the time. Looking back now, I think adoration describes it best. Something almost human-shaped, but with long and thin spindly appendages, was coming from the water. It was matte black and almost difficult to distinguish from the water and soil in the low light, until it hauled itself further and began to crawl. I didn't know what it was, but my prey instincts told me I did not want to be here when it fully emerged, to find out. The non-rightness of it had my skin crawling. I reached for Fallon's hand, but it slipped through my fingers. She was jogging towards it before I realized what was happening. And then, my wife did something that shocked me. She reached down, helped it in the remaining way out of the water, and to its feet. She began talking to it quickly, excitedly, and leading it towards me. My brain was still trying to process the turn of events. I wasn't entirely sure what I was seeing. If I had been alone, I would have bolted in the opposite direction, but I couldn't leave her. I stood frozen in place, poised to dart forward to grab her away from it, but she was holding on to it. Fallon had draped one of its long, thin appendages over her shoulder. She approached holding it as if it were an injured hiking partner. "Jordan," she said, her eyes misty. This is my roommate Katie, from college." She patted it on what would have been a shoulder, had it been entirely human-shaped. "Katie, it's been so long," she gestured towards me. "This is my husband, Jordan." I stood there dumbfounded. I was frozen, my stomach heavy with a sort of fear I can't really describe, other than the feeling of seeing something human eyes were probably not meant to see. I feel like you don't need me to tell you this, but I just want to confirm to you that there was no way in hell that thing was Katie. I had met Katie before, and she was an actual living human being. We were even friends on Instagram. According to her recently posted pictures, she was living in Cape Cod, not visiting the bottom of a lake in the middle of nowhere several states away. When my brain and mouth finally started working again, all I could bring myself to say was, honey, I don't think that's... But before I could think of how to even finish my sentence, I noticed that where the thing rested on her shoulder, the delineation of where her arms and shoulders ended and its body began seemed less crisp somehow. I hoped it was a trick of the light, but the observation stirred me out of my stupor. I became more insistent. "Fallon, I need you to get away from that, please. I don't know what you're seeing, but that isn't Katie," I said. I said it as calmly as I could. I thought that maybe if I reasoned with her, it'd snap her out of whatever delusion she was trapped in. "Please, remember where we are. Why would she be out here? Why would she crawl out of the lake?" She looked at me indignant. "You want me to leave her here on her own? Injured?" I had to rack my brain a bit, but then I did recall a story about how Katie had injured her leg in what would be the first and last time the two of them went skiing. Fallon had helped her get back to the lodge. This had been years and years ago, long before we were even dating. Was she reliving this moment? I didn't know what to do. She was latched onto that thing like it was her best friend, literally. She looked at me with that fiery determination in her golden eyes that I usually loved about her, but in this case it had me worried for her life. "All right," I eventually said, warily. It hadn't attacked her, or really moved at all since it emerged, and I wanted to get us away from that lake as soon as possible, before anything else crawled out of it. I didn't see any choice but to continue back the way we came. I led us back along the path, to the stream, glancing over my shoulder every so often at her and the thing. She was having a one-sided conversation with it about a different friend, laughing as if it had told her a joke. When she caught me staring, she narrowed her eyes at me. I tried to see what she was seeing, but I couldn't. When we reached the stream, after about 15 minutes, I stepped across it, same as before. I turned to Fallon, unsure of what to do. She had stopped and was staring at me. Against my better judgment, I held out my hand. "Fallon, I'll get her across so you can jump," I whispered. She ignored me, and instead she continued on, putting one foot into the stream as if she didn't see it there at all. Luckily, it seemed to surprise her, because she jolted back before she could have put her full weight on it and fallen in. She stumbled back, as if surprised, shook her head like she was trying to awaken from a daydream. "What?" Her annoyed look had instantly changed to one of confusion. "What's happening? How did we get back here already? Where's Katie?" The confusion quickly gave way to fear. Blood drained from her face. She had turned her head and seemed to be seeing the thing draped over her shoulder for what it was now. She was just now feeling the primal terror I had felt when I saw it emerge from the water. She was trying to push it off her violently. She was panicking, struggling, screaming, shattering the silence. "I can't! Get off!" Her eyes pleaded with me. I jumped back over to help. "Jordan, please," she begged, her voice hoarse from screaming. I tried to help pull the thing off her, but wherever she had touched it, it was as if it had absorbed her into its own body. My breathing was frantic. I was trying to tell her it'd be okay, telling her to stay calm, while clearly not doing so myself. Suddenly she started slowly moving away from me. Her eyes were full of confusion and fear. The thing, now that it was attached to her fully, it had begun to move away from me slowly and dragged her with it. Our eyes met as we realized it was taking her back where we came from, towards the dark water. I grabbed her hand, pulled her towards me, putting all of my weight into it. For as thin and spindly as it was, it still managed to pull her strongly in the opposite direction. "Please, Jordan," she sobbed, her voice cracked. Please don't let it take me." Suddenly, the thing relented a bit, and without its resistance, I fell backwards into the water. All three of us were yanked in by the force of my fall and the currents. I watched helplessly as she struggled to stay above water. I'll never forget the look on her face, one of abject terror, as the thing pushed me away from her and she was swept away. When I finally caught onto something along the shore and managed to pull myself out, I was coughing up water. I wasn't sure where I was. My phone was soaked, the maps were gone, but my first thought was Fallon. I ran, screaming her name as dusk began to settle. Somehow I found her. She was sitting against a tree, hugging herself, her eyes wide with shock, but to my immense relief she was alive. And the thing was gone. She looked like her normal self, albeit traumatized a bit. I held her, told her we were okay. We were going to be okay, we'd made it. We decided to head straight to the car and leave rather than wander around in the dying light trying to find our campsite. We'd come back for our gear later. We walked back towards the car, her hand in mine. But the thing is, now I can't let go of her hand. Don't deliver to 166 Lower Creek Road. Please. If you DoorDash, do not deliver to 166 Lower Creek Road. If you get that address, please cancel immediately. Ignore the high tip, it's not worth it. I haven't been DoorDashing long. I think it's been 2 months since I started. Now I'm writing this submission from the trunk of my car. Why am I writing this instead of calling the cops? Well, because I've already called 911, and the dispatcher laughed and hung up. According to her, 166 Lower Creek Road doesn't exist, and they get a prank call about that address every other night. Hell, she even said that Lower Creek Road has been closed for years. So I'm writing my story on here, because you all will believe me. I was in the last 10 minutes of a 4-hour shift with DoorDash. When I saw that it was 10:50 p.m., I decided to call it a night and head home. I then attempted to end my dash, but a new order popped up. Go to McDonald's. The pay showed $50. The pay is usually 10 at the highest. I couldn't say no. I was already close to McDonald's, and it didn't take long to get there. Once inside, the cashier informed me that there wasn't a DoorDash order with the order number I had. I looked at the items ordered, and it was just an ice water and nothing else. $50 pay for an ice water. Whatever, I'll take it. The cashier laughed at the order and handed over a large styrofoam cup of water. She informed me they get an order like this every other night. As I walked back to my car, I felt very weird about this order. My gut told me to cancel, but I had already left the store with the item. The delivery address was only 3.5 miles out, and I reminded myself of the high payout. Money that I really needed. So I pulled out onto the highway and made my way to Lower Creek Road. In no time, the GPS had me on a heavily wooded dirt road. It was very curvy and hard to navigate in the dark. My paranoia had me seeing things out of the corner of my eyes. I pressed on. After what felt like an eternity, the GPS said aloud, "Turn left onto Lower Creek Road in a quarter mile." Once at the road, there wasn't any road sign, but I made the left anyway. "Your destination will be on your right in 1 mile," the GPS said. Off the bat, I noticed none of the mailbox numbers started with a 1. They all started with a 6. And if the road was like any other, then the actual address of my destination was 666 Lower Creek Road. Now, I'm not religious or superstitious, but the idea that the address was actually 666 made me feel even more worried. All the homes on the road looked very run down and deserted. I was now only about 400 feet from my turn, and I could see an old rusty mailbox at the head of the driveway. Sure enough, the numbers on the mailbox read 666. The GPS sang out that I was at my destination, and the DoorDash app read off the delivery instructions. "Leave at my feet. Do not disturb." Those words chilled me. Usually the directions were simple, "leave at door," or "hand to customer." I slowly pulled down the driveway, which was fully surrounded by thick undergrowth and large trees. The little dirt road finally gave way to an opening. There was no house in the clearing. Sitting right in the middle of the opening were what seemed to be 3 men. They were sitting on lawn chairs in a semicircle. They were illuminated by a blue light that was being emitted from the ground by what looked like a projector. They all had their hands up in the air and were looking directly into the blue light. The scene made me so nervous I began to feel nauseous. I got out of my car and slowly walked towards them. I've never walked so slowly and quietly in my life. I didn't want them to notice me at all. Once I reached them, I could tell they were all completely naked. The man in the middle had a small box in his lap, and smoke was coming from the box like something was smoldering inside it. There was a strong smell of burning hair around them. The only noise was the hum of the projector. I approached the man closest to the road and carefully tried to set the cup of ice water at his feet. My hands were shaking too badly and I dropped the cup, spilling the water all over his feet. None of them had any reaction. I promptly stood up and walked back to the car as fast as I could. My heart was beating out of my chest. When I got within about 5 feet of my car, I looked back towards the men. Only one of them remained in his seat. The other 2 were gone. For a moment, everything felt still, and then the man's head snapped in my direction. He stood immediately and started sprinting towards me. I turned quickly to get into my car, but what I saw stopped me completely. The other 2 men were sitting in the driver and passenger seats, both of them staring forward. I heard the man's footsteps closing in from behind me, and before I could react, he tackled me headfirst into my car. The impact was violent, and I immediately felt blood running down my face. As I pleaded, the man dragged me back to the lawn chairs. He threw me down in the middle chair and dumped whatever was burning in the small box over my head. The embers burned my scalp. I began to scream as the man grabbed my face and forced me to stare into the light. My eyes began to get very heavy, and I couldn't keep them from closing. When they opened, I was no longer in the middle of the woods at night. It was now daylight. I was now high in the mountain and seated in front of a massive opening in the side of a mountain. Carvings were all around the outside of the opening. The carvings depicted faces with their mouths agape. The men were seated beside me. All 3 hummed in unison. The opening gave way to a large pit that seemed to be forever deep. A large gust of wind pushed out from within the mountain before the air was sucked back into the opening forcefully. It was like the mountain was breathing. Each exhale pushed me away. Each inhale pulled me closer and closer to the pit. My eyes widened as I realized it wasn't the mountain breathing, but that something very large down inside the mountain was the source of the air. Something very massive. Something very alive. Just the thought of the unidentified being made me want to scream out in madness. My fixation on the abyss was broken by a buzzing and vibration in my pockets. My phone was ringing. This broke my trance and I realized I was back in the woods in the middle of the night. I looked around me and realized that the three men were still in a meditative state as they looked into the blue light. I jumped from the chair and started a dash for my car. I crashed into the driver's side door and dug for my keys. Nothing. They were gone. I looked towards the men and noticed they were now walking towards me. I noticed my trunk was open and hopped inside before slamming it down. That's how I ended up in the trunk. I'm laying here with no hope. I just want you to know to never deliver to 666 Lower Creek Road. Also, there is something in that mountain. It's alive, and it wants us all. Hey everybody, thank you so much for either watching or listening. If you enjoyed these two scary stories, please don't forget to give the video a like and drop a comment down below so that I know to make more of these. I hope that you have an amazing week, and I'll see you next week for a new video.